Let's go to Syria, where Bashar al-Assad's forces continue to retake territory from the opposition. Syria's war, some say, may be entering a decisive phase. There are now warnings the regime could launch an offensive against Idlib province, an area to which rebels have been forcibly moved from other parts of the country. It is also home to many displaced civilians. Idlib is the only area still largely controlled by the opposition. Our Middle East correspondent Sarah Firth has more.
Idlib right now feels like a holding pen. There are warnings that this, almost the last rebel-held territory in Syria, could soon be attacked by the regime. That's a concern for those who've already fled fighting elsewhere in the country, like Firas Dip from Aleppo.
Idlib province is currently under a threat of a possible major offensive by Russia and Syrian regime. Any offensive on this area will create a humanitarian catastrophe.
As well as rebel groups bust here from other parts of Syria under truces reached with the regime, Idlib also hosts millions of displaced Syrians who fled fighting.
The public services in Homs were so bad. We were displaced from the area and now in the Idlib countryside. What will our situation be in the case of an offensive on this area? We don't want to stay here, but this is the only safe shelter we have. We came here because we refuse any reconciliation with Russia or Assad.
Despite Idlib coming under a de-escalation zone agreement, Syrian regime attacks backed by Russia have continued.
We lived in a tent in the past. A tent can't block the heat of the sun. There's no electricity, water, nor a fan. We have young children who are suffering in these high temperatures, and above all, we're hearing that the regime and Russia will launch an offensive against Idlib. So what will our fate be? Where will we go?
Just across the border here, and people in Idlib have told us repeatedly that they're afraid of such an attack. They say were it to happen, they'd have nowhere else left to run. Sarah Firth, TRT World, on the Turkish-Syrian border.
Khaled Khouja is the former president of the Syrian National Council. He's also the founder of the Damascus Declaration in Turkey and the official platform for solidarity with the Syrian people. He joins me now from Gaziantep. Many thanks for speaking to us on TRT World, Khaled. Realistically, given what we've seen so far in terms of the Syrian regime, do you think an Idlib offensive or Idlib attack by the Syrian regime is inevitable?
Well, actually, there is no role for Syrian regime in the attacks, as it happens in Dera'a. The Russians are leading the offensive and the aggressions against the cities. After Ghouta, they progressed toward Dera'a and they captured the city eventually. Actually, this aggression reflects Russia's political strategy from the beginning and shows that Russia rejects the international resolutions which sees that the transition as a proper starting point for the political settlement in Syria. And it violates the de-escalation agreement with Turkey. This is the strategy of Mr. Putin. This was from the beginning, and the regime has no role. The whole process is being led by Mr. Putin himself.
So you are saying an attack on Idlib is inevitable?
For sure. Well, actually, if we see what happened in Dera'a, unfortunately, the United States, the operation center in Amman, asked the rebels, the fighters in Dera'a, and the people not to rely on it. And this is what happened also in the northern area. The United States withdrew from the operation centers here and cut the support for the FSA. And now the FSA fighters are very concerned about the possible intervention of the Russian military forces with the Iranians towards Idlib.
Okay, Khaled, let me ask you this. If and when Idlib falls, let's talk worst case scenario here. Assad will essentially have won the war, but as you say, with the support of the Russians and the Iranians, who have both paid a heavy price for their stake in shaping Syria's future, they won't let that go. What are they going to want in return? What is the future going to look like for Syria?
Well, Mr. Putin wants to achieve military victory in Syria in order to enforce his political view of settlement, which will not work. On the opposite, if the Russian forces invade Dera'a, then the fighters will go underground, and we will witness a new wave of guerrilla war, which has been started in Damascus, in Hama, and as well as the coastal area. So this will lead us to a total chaotic situation, and no one needs it. So no one wants it. So now there is a counterpart talking with the Russians as well as with the Syrian regime in Geneva and in Astana. But if Mr. Putin commits massacres as he did in Dera'a and invade Idlib, then there will no any counterpart on the other side of the table. There will be a total guerrilla war, and the brigades. We don't want it, but there are a lot of fighters related to Al Qaeda, other than Al-Nusra. They already went underground. They will launch their guerrilla war. So this will be totally out of control.
It already feels out of control, but you're saying it could get potentially even worse. Khaled Khouja, former president of the Syrian National Council, many thanks for speaking to us.